Hi, glad to see you on your channel. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel. It's important to us. Have a good view. In the summer of 1931, Plant Number 8 received an order to produce 350 twin tank mounts of the B-3 gun with 7.62mm DT machine gun for the BT tanks. However, by the end of the year, it turned out that the main artillery department of the Red Army GAU had failed to fulfill the task. The twin gun was never designed, so for the first tanks, a new turret had to be created, in which the machine gun was placed to the right of the gun mask in a separately mounted ball-mounted unit. The 60 turrets already produced by the Izorsky Zavod without a hole for the ball mount were armed only with a cannon, so some of the first production BT tanks were deprived of machine gun armament. The next 240 turrets produced by Izhorsk and Mariupol plants, 120 pieces each, were produced for separately mounted B-3 cannon and 7.62mm DT machine gun. But Plant Number 8 was not able to fully implement the plan of production of 350 B-3 guns, as it produced them in a semi-artisanal way without a ready set of technical documents necessary for the organization of a full industrial cycle of production. The guns were accepted by the Military Acceptance Committee slowly, with creaking and a high percentage of rejections, so the 190 guns produced were not enough for all BT tanks. Besides, according to the new approved plans, 620 tanks were to be produced. Therefore, it was decided to replace the cannon on individual vehicles with a DT-2 or DA-2 twin gun of two 7.62mm tank or air machine guns of Degtyaryov system. Starting from the IV quarter of 1933, the twin machine guns together with armored masks were sent directly to tank units of the Red Army. The unarmed BT-2s were transferred to the units earlier, so that tankers could start to master them. Machine gun mounts were installed on the vehicles and military units by their repair services. As a result, serial BT tanks had four variants of armament: cannon armament, cannon gun armament, machine gun armament, twin machine gun, reinforced machine gun armament, twin machine gun plus DT machine gun in a ball-mounted unit. Starting with the 301st vehicle, it was planned to mount the BT tank with a new design turret with a 45mm 20K gun, a copy of the German 45mm analog, with a twin DT machine gun. A single turret was designed for both the BT and T-26 tanks, but it was installed on the new model, the BT-5. Attempts were made to mount the 45mm gun in the old turret, but this was abandoned as there was too little space for the crew. The BT became the BT-2. In February 1933, the BT tank was finally assigned the BT-2 index, while two M1931 tanks received from the USA were considered under the BT-1 index. During the serial production of the vehicle by the end of 1932, the Design Bureau, under the direction of A.O. Fursov, developed a new modification with the factory index BT-3, which was the same BT-2 tank, all parts of which were converted from inch measurements to metric ones. This tank was subsequently delivered to the troops under the BT-2 index. In 1932, the KHPZ produced 396 tanks, and in 1933, another 224 tanks. Out of the first 13 BT-2s, which were assembled from ordinary steel, 10 were sent to educational institutions and units, and 3 vehicles were kept at the KHPZ and used for development work. Tanks with iron turrets were sent to units as training ones, and they were painted in a special way. A red stripe was applied inside over white paint. By the end of 1934, the iron turrets on 15 BT-2s were replaced by armored ones. In the first quarter of 1935, it was planned to replace 10 more hulls and 48 turrets, but it was not done, as the Kharkiv locomotive plant switched to the production of the BT-5 tank. Interestingly, the BT-2 can be listed in the Guinness Book as the tank with the highest number of specific horsepower per ton of weight, 35.4. Thus, the T-80U tank has this figure of 27.2, while the speed developed by both vehicles on the highway is approximately the same, 70 km/h. The BT-2 accelerated to this speed moving on wheels. The thickness of the armor of the BT-2 tank was 13 mm at the frontal and side parts of both turret and hull, 6 mm at the rear armor parts, 10 mm at the roof and bottom. The armored hull also served as a frame on which all other parts of the vehicle were attached. The side walls were double, and in the inner space between them and the side armor plates were placed fuel tanks, as well as spring elements of the candle suspension. The tank had a classic layout. In the front, there was a control compartment with a mechanic driver's seat placed in its center. The frontal armor plate near the driver's seat was mounted at a strong slope, which improved visibility. In the armor plate were made a hatch with an opening armor cover and the head compartment for the mechanic driver with an opening front shield with an observation slit. At the rear was the combat compartment, where the tank commander was located, who acted as gunner, as well as the loader, who was also a machine gunner if necessary. In the machine gun version of the tank, the third crew member could not be a gunner. The engine transmission compartment was separated from the combat compartment by a partition with vents and doors, and behind it was the transmission compartment, also separated by a partition with a cutout for a fan. The Christie suspension of the BT-2 tanks determined the development of Soviet tank building for the next 15 years. All the vehicles of the BT series and the subsequent models of the T-34 and T-34-85 tanks were equipped with this suspension, which was abandoned at the very end of the war when the T-44 and T-54 tanks were created. The BT-2 had a combined wheel and track system, consisting of a pair of 640 mm diameter rear driving wheels, a pair of 550 mm diameter front guide wheels, and 4 pairs of 850 mm diameter twin support rollers with rubber bands. Each track was 263 mm wide and consisted of 46 tracks, 23 of which were flat and 23 of which had a single ridge. Transition from caterpillar to wheeled travel was made by the crew in 30-40 minutes. In this case, the drive was transferred to the rear pair of support rollers, and the front pair became the driving one. The signature highlight of the BT-2 was its jumps. During acceleration and from the ramp, it could fly above the ground at a distance of up to 40 meters. Of course, after such overloads, both support rollers and suspension of the tank were quickly out of order, but this attraction looked spectacular at the demonstration exercises. There was also a practical application of jumps. Tanks could rapidly ford small water obstacles, ditches, and trench lines to support infantry units that broke through with fire. Vehicles on the BT-2 chassis. Before the appearance of the BT-5 tank, several attempts were made to create new specialized or modernized vehicles on the basis of the BT-2. The designer N.I. Darenkov tried to create an artillery tank for infantry support, which could fire on a mounted trajectory and suppress the fire points of the entrenched enemy. For this purpose, he designed a turret for a 76 mm gun of the 1910 model, but then abandoned it in favor of the 76 mm PS-3 tank gun, developed by engineer P.N. Syachintov. It, as well as the 37 mm PS-2, was adopted for service, but the Krasny Pudilovets plant failed to establish its production. As a result, the turret was abandoned, and it did not suit the military for ergonomic reasons. There were also developed projects of vehicles for overcoming obstacles, a flamethrower tank, and a bridge-laying vehicle, but all of them went no further than the construction and testing of prototypes. Under the leadership of military technician of the second rank N.F. Tsiganov, the BT-2 with an improved running gear was created. The BT-2IS tank, which received 3 leading support rollers on each side, an improved hull, and an improved transmission. This tank was also abandoned in favor of the more advanced BT-5. A vehicle with underwater driving equipment for the OPVT tank was also designed, but in the process of testing it was found out that it was not reliable enough and cumbersome, so the tank was not put into production. There were attempts to increase the cross-country ability of the BT-2 with the help of mats carried by the tank, which were wound on special drums. When approaching a swampy area, the mats from the drums were directed under the tracks of the tank, without the crew going outside, thanks to which the tank did not get stuck in the mud. However, in the process of testing, it became clear that when moving in this way, the speed of the tank did not exceed 4 to 5 km/h, and the tank itself could move only in a straight line. Then an attempt was made to create wooden linings on the tracks, which would be attached to the tracks with special metal brackets. But the machine equipped with such devices could move only in a straight line and at low speed, which did not suit the military. There was a project of attaching 1.2–1.3 meters long fascines on the overtrack regiments of the BT-2, which would be dropped from the tank into the ditch to overcome it, but they demasked the vehicle and interfered with fire, so their use was also abandoned. On the fields of bloody battles, the BT-2 tanks did not take part in the Spanish Civil War, nor in the clashes with the Japanese army on Lake Hassan, and received their first baptism of fire on the Khalkhin Gol River in the summer of 1939. The psychological effect of such a massive tank attack was also huge. In addition, the BT-2s took part in the Polish campaign of the Red Army in September 1939, where they were used in small quantities, as the basis of the tank fleet of the USSR by that time already consisted of BT-7 and T-26 tanks. These vehicles were mainly used in tank regiments of cavalry divisions, where their number ranged from 34 in the 44th TA of the 3rd CD to 41 in the 42nd TA of the 4th CC. During the Finnish Winter War of 1939–40, the 1st Light Tank Brigade had the largest number of BT-2 tanks, 82 vehicles, among the units that took part in the battles. Most of these vehicles were out of service for technical reasons during the battles and were evacuated to the factory. There were also combat losses. The Finns managed to hit 4 tanks and they were burned down, and the other 2 were drowned. A limited number of BT-2 tanks, which were part of the 13th LTBR, took part in the first night attack in the area of Kiamuria Station, now Gavrilovo, on the night of February 15–16, 1940. In this battle, the 13th LTBR, with minimal losses on its part, destroyed 800 soldiers and officers of the enemy, 10 anti-tank guns, and up to 15 machine guns. In addition, 250 Finnish soldiers were captured, 8 Renault tanks, an artillery battery, as well as a large amount of small arms and ammunition were captured. In May 1940, it was decided to keep all 597 BT-2s in the training parks of military units until the complete wear and tear of the material part. By June 1, 1941, the Red Army had 580 BT-2 line tanks in service, including 396 units in the western districts. Of these, 366 were on the move and were used only as training vehicles. 119 BT-2s required medium repairs, 30 required overhaul, and another 72 were purely training tanks and were used mainly as training stands. With the beginning of hostilities, all BT-2 tanks, which were in the Army as training vehicles, were put into service, were part of tank and motorized divisions, and participated in battles almost all along the front. Thus, in the 5th Mech Corps there were 10 BT-2s, in the 6th, 30, in the 7th, 27, in the 8th, 14, in the 24th Tank Division of the 10th Mech Corps, 139. By the summer of 1941, the age of these tanks reached 8–10 years, and their unspent motor resource was insignificant. The overwhelming majority of BT-2s died in border battles or were abandoned on the march because they were out of service. For example, in the same 24th TD on July 24, 1941, there was not a single BT-2 left. The reason for this was partly the shortage of 37mm shells, the production of which had been stopped by that time, and the cannon BT-2s simply did not have enough of them. Part of the tanks that survived after the defeat of summer-autumn 1941 participated in the Battle of Moscow. So, in the 18th Tank Brigade had 5 units of BT-2, and on the Leningrad front in the summer of 1943, there were 12 of these machines. No authentic BT-2 tank has survived in the world today, but the Museum of Armored Vehicles in Kubinka has a hybrid, which may be a prototype of the BT-2M prototype tank. The BT-5 chassis is fitted with the BT-2 sub-base plate and turret. Thank you for watching the video to the end. Forget to put a like and subscribe to the channel. It's important to us. See you soon.